Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Peace Studio Summit. My name is Mariano Avila. I'm a producer with Milwaukee PBS and a board member here at the Peace Studio, and I'm absolutely honored to be here today to talk to you about Indigenous healing practices with resilience counselor Hunter Genia. Hunter, thank you very much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Mariano, and thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be asked to be a part of this awesome event.
Well, if you don't mind, should we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
All right. So this summer you led a 3-part workshop on the dance of trauma, finding our resilience. And I'd love to just start by asking you about the trauma you see among Indigenous communities, and what does the dance of trauma look like?
Oh goodness. Well, first of all, if I could just share a little bit in my language, just to open up. I just want to say Ani Minogujep. Gusa Ninin Indigenous cause, Wabajan Shido Dam, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, the Didda, Minwa, Grand Rapids, Michigan, the Dojaba, Chimweshka, Biji, Yik, Kina, Jeba. So I just wanted to start off in that way and just in the ways that we're taught. When we open up in our language, we're introducing ourselves to those spirits and manitals that we have around us. And so I just wanted to greet everybody in the oldest language in the Great Lakes, pre-contact with any other countries and nations. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
Thank you for sharing that with us. The 4 sacred statements, right? Is very important to understanding, I guess, our background. And so to bring it back, if you could tell us a little bit about some of this. I mean, you already just alluded to it now, the language and other things that, the original people of Turtle Island, the North American continent, have experienced. Could you tell us a little bit about from there to now in your work? How does trauma and healing look like?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate this in the short few minutes that we have together. I come from a very proud people, the Anishinaabeg. I come from the Ojibwe that some people call Chippewa, and the Odawa people that some people call Ottawa. And we also have the Potawatomi or the Potawatomi people that are in our state here as well, in the region. And when I am asked to do a lot of the trauma and resilience kind of work, I've always come from a place of strength because, I feel like I'm here today. And our ancestors, our wisdom keepers, those that had the knowledge, I look at my mom, for instance, who was born in her grandpa's little log cabin, no running water, no electricity, the things that we most or maybe enjoy or take for granted. My mom was born during a time when, and this is still true for many indigenous nations within the United States, where we're kind of the poorest of the poor. And it's like, how did we get to that place? How did, when upon arrival of many other nations that came over and that were originally lost and we found them, it's like we had everything. We have everything that we could always want and hope for, to live just a simple way of life, in balance with creation and with our environment. And, so that dance of trauma, you kind of referenced that, it's really about the acknowledgement that, that things have happened just in the short very short, few hundred years, honestly. I mean, and I descend from two the Grand River bands of Ottawa and also the Saginaw, Swan Creek, and Black River bands of Chippewa, who were parties to many, many federal treaties, and that guaranteed, that our people could live together, be together, have set aside lands, for our people to, call home within our home. And, but here are two bands and tribes that were federally terminated by the United States government and are still trying to work through the swamp, should I say, to be restored back to federal recognition status and to try to get the United States to honor those treaties. But all within that, um, a lot of the federal policies and rollouts of these very ill resourced attempts to, you know, how do we acculturate? How do we assimilate? And at one point in time during American history, when they were deciding what to do with our people, um, the idea of extermination was on the table. It was really only a financial decision that they found that it would be too expensive to exterminate all of our people, that they really kind of came up with this whole idea of, the Indian boarding schools and that model. So, and I don't think people realize that by 1890 in the United States, less than 240,000 of our people were still living, breathing in our original homelands. And by 1871, the United States made a policy that they would make no more treaties with our people because we were no longer, in their view, a military threat. So, by 1871, the treaty making era was over, and we have lost millions and millions of land. And, and people say, well, that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago that happened. And I just want to share, Mariano, that, I grew up with my grandparents, and I was very fortunate. My grandparents, as children, were a part of the federal Indian boarding school um, government, schools. And I lived 3 miles from where these buildings still stand here in Mount Pleasant, called the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School. Both my grandfather and my grandmother attended that as children. So we know that, we couldn't speak our own language. We had to cut our hair. We had to change from our any of our indigenous clothing to kind of like a military, kind of a domesticated clothing style. And oftentimes our children were loaned out to area farms for child labor. And of course we couldn't practice our own indigenous ways and knowledge of our relationship to the creator, and our own spirituality. So when you take all of those things combined, and I just want to emphasize that, historical trauma or intergenerational trauma or inherent trauma, whatever we may call it, it didn't start or end with boarding schools, right? Because even after the boarding schools, the majority of them that did close in the 1930s, like the one here in Mount Pleasant, we still had to deal with systematic removal of our culture and heritage through for instance, the Indian Adoption Project. Upwards of 50,000 of our children were removed from native homes and placed in non-native homes just during the 1950s and through the 70s, which prompted eventually the Indian Child Welfare Act. But through that systematic process of removal, you know, um, again, those is just another way of trying to erase culture, heritage, language, our own spirituality. And that was done through contracts from the federal government out to both religious and public adoption agencies. It was a collaborative effort. So, and that disregarded the same race kind of matching for adoption. That wasn't true for our people. They were placed in non native homes intentionally. But when you take away the future, right? You take away that tribe's future to self govern, to revitalize language, revitalize culture, take it from hiding out into where a safe place. So all of that stuff combined, I mean, you can imagine the impact on our mental health, spiritual health, physical health, and emotional health. And for a long time, science and even counseling or mental health really try to divide those and put them into separate categories. But we know that that's a part of our whole being. So what you do to one part of that being is going to impact our whole being. There's no way of getting around that. So I really work with and I work with a lot of awesome people to really work on some of the native wellness and promote healing. But we have to promote healing not by just pretending those things never happened, right? Just because still today, what I just shared with you is not in our K through 12 American history or social studies books through even today, even 2021, that information is not there.
Well, and also, if I can jump in, one of the things that I don't think people realize, we know a gentleman in common, Jonathan Reinhardt. He is, I think, maybe approaching 50, and he is the youngest person I've ever talked to who went through the boarding school system.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who are in their 40s.
Oh, yeah.
Who went through the boarding school system. This is not something in the ancient past. These are people that were separated from their families year round, cut off from their culture and their language and their spirituality, who are relatively young adults.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't realize is that when you remove children as young as 3 years of age, and then they don't come out of those systems until they're 15, 16 years old, we just raised them in an institution where it was very cold, unemotional, away from our culture, and so the psychological and traumatic impact that can have, I mean, you just can't, sum it up well enough. So, and my own brother and sister attended the same Catholic Indian boarding school up in northern Michigan, and so a lot of my relatives and friends in their mid to late 40s or early 50s, they're still living today, living with that experience, and traumatic for sure. But one of the things that we try to do is really, because we can't get stuck in the trauma, right? I mean, but at the same time, we have to have understanding. But how do we have understanding if we don't acknowledge what has happened? And, even when I work with universities and colleges or do trainings or presentations for counseling or institutions, whatever organization it might be, just like this, um, you know, acknowledging our past. I mean, we can do that in a good way where we're not stuck in the trauma, but we can help transcend it by having that understanding of what happened. And so we do see a lot of our communities now with a lot of the language revitalization, acknowledgement of cultural, ceremonial, ritual practices that, were quite frankly deemed paganistic and heathenistic by, religious institutions that had no understanding of our beautiful covenant with Creator.
And
Our
to that
relationship.
point, can I ask you a question about that
Yeah.
particular point? So how does traditional knowledge, and you as a counselor with the training that you have, how do those traditional practices, we've got about 4 minutes left, so how do those practices translate into things that the rest of us can understand if we're not in the community?
Yeah. It's real interesting. This is what I find real interesting, right? Is sometimes we don't believe things to be true until we have research and science, And so like, the big term, like holistic health, I mean, we see that all over the place, in through medical schools and just, practices, and now everyone's talking about integrated or holistic health. And it's like, I just kind of chuckle because it's like, well, that's exactly what we were doing when, when people came over and our relatives on the Eastern shores really helped them to survive to even, because they had no way of understanding how to be and survive and live here. So, um, but that's why I kind of have, this is what I really would emphasize. When we can heal, when we can heal the earth, and I know that sounds cliche, but when we can heal the earth, we can really heal ourselves. Why? Because when you take a look about, think about how we have to understand what our human place is in the bigger picture of life. And that's what really, really what it comes down to, because when we try to control, own, and manipulate all of the resources, I mean, that's when we become so unbalanced that we become unhealthy as a people. And a lot of we want to use science supports at the fact that much of science relies on indigenous knowledge of plants and medicines. I mean, look at how many things are on the market today that actually comes from, whether it's herbs or plants or roots or trees. We already have that knowledge, right? But so there's a benefit, a huge benefit, to keeping that knowledge alive and well, and making sure that as we also, how that aligns with healing, because whether our relationship to the water, here, say, like here in the Great Lakes, I mean, people don't understand that protecting the Great Lakes really only enhances that balance that we need, and just being able to sustain life. I mean, but when I go to ceremonies, speaking my language, I'm basically reaffirming that we exist today. And sadly, a lot of people don't know who we are today, and we're not very visible. You turn on the radio, you turn on the TV. I mean, we are still a very invisible people.
And
Um,
to that point, I guess make one little comment as we wrap up? I think you also touched on something that's important, and having done some work in specifically the communities that you are part of, I think for us as allies, the idea of the Great Lakes is somewhat abstract. If you could just kind of, to wrap up, we've got probably 30 seconds left. If you could tell us a little bit of how we can protect the Great Lakes today.
mhm. What's funny is we live in a capitalistic society here in the United States, right? Can you imagine a capitalistic catastrophe that would happen if we did not protect the Great
Mm.
Lakes and our agriculture and our natural woodland life. I mean, if that was all destroyed and gone, I mean, you're talking about an economy that would totally tank. So really the trick is how do we assure people that protecting the waters, protecting our land, protecting the air and our environment only is going to sustain uh, that American way of life that so many people seek, it really is an investment into sustainability, but we just have to continue to think smarter, and in balance, and
And I think
so
that's, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. Well, I mean, people think you only can have one or the other, and they can't live together, and it's like so untrue,
Yeah.
you
The
know.
the the thing that I've learned, that I think, to your point of sustainability, that is an old native, or I should say ancient native tradition, is the idea of working now for 7 generations in the
Yeah.
future. So sustainability being that. Hunter, I really want to thank you for your time, for your wisdom, for your work in Native communities, and for being with us today. As part of the Peace Studio, we're very honored and we're very grateful to you for your words and your wisdom. I wish you the best in all of your work ahead. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and prayers and blessings to all that are listening.